Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Glenn Hallam Podcast. It is a pleasure, as always, to have you along listening to me. I'm truly honoured. This is actually podcast number 5, and during this episode, I'm lucky enough to get to speak to a guy I've known for many years called Steve Simmonds. Now, Steve Simmonds is a drummer, educator and a lecturer at one of our local colleges, and has many different stories about how he got into playing, and also the drummers that influence him that kind of made him how he is today. And so I hope you enjoy it. There are previous episodes that you can listen to. Please do go and like them, share them, do whatever we do these days. I would be very grateful. So here we are. Let's get straight back at it. Here's my interview I did a few days ago with Steve Simmonds. Please enjoy. Steve, welcome to my podcast, and thank you for doing this. How are you doing?
Doing well, mate. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is a pleasure.
Very pleased to be here. It's lovely to catch up as well.
Well, it is, and I think that's one of the great things that's come out this pandemic. I think people are catching up with each other and doing these kind of things, and it's great. It's keeping our mental health right. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, Steve, you're a drummer, as I know, and
I am.
Yeah. Now, tell me about. You're a drummer, and I've since found out that. Well, obviously you were a teacher because that's how I met you. But also you're essentially a drum player, you're a teacher, you now work in a college, lecturing music. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, I guess. But as a drummer, where did it all start for you?
Where did it start? Well, I as a musician, I suppose, I started playing guitar and piano when I was 6 or 7 years old, 7 maybe. They were my first instruments up until I was 11. And it was, I got quite into guitar. We always had music around the house. My dad, massive music fan, always listening to Dire Straits and Quo and the Police and loads of great bands. And it was Dire Straits. It was Money for Nothing, the extended intro with the drums. And he got me the Brothers in Arms album as a way of encouraging my guitar playing. And that intro with the little sort of improvised drum section, that was it for me. I was like, yeah, wrong instrument here. Let's go drums. So as soon as I started secondary school and they said, well, do you want music lessons? I was like, yeah, drums, let's do it.
That was that's making me feel old. I remember that was that was incredible when you heard that hype. We now know that it was Sting, but that album was amazing. And then
that's a phenomenal album. Yeah, absolutely.
I think every pub band at the time was playing Money for Nothing, wasn't it?
Yeah, incredible record. And the whole album was. And I can remember in primary school, year 5 and 6. We had a primary school teacher called Mr. Newton, and they'd always let us play music when we were doing handwriting or something. But he'd always have dibs on it, and it would always be that record that he'd be playing. So I'd be listening to Walk of Life in year 5, writing handwriting tests and things like that while I was. So yeah, I was quite fortunate with the fact that my dad was really into music as well, and bands like The Who as well. I kind of grew up around these absolutely classical, influential, Keith Moon and Stuart Copeland and even the Quo guys. I mean, I think that's all. That was phenomenal.
I think I was, because I'm a bit older than you, but the Quo was a big thing for the average pub band where people were, whatever you want, and the Caroline thing came out, and I think because the band that I was playing at the time, they were doing a lot of Quo, but then you're right about the Money for Nothing came on. There was some kind of association with that guitar lick that was like rocky and kind of poppy at the same time.
My drum teacher at secondary school, I was very lucky. 95% of the pupils that he had thought he was uber strict and, quite a scary kind of guy. And I got on with him so well, but he kind of reinforced the fundamentals, and it was the foundation to everything I've done since. Just the
Sure.
emphasis on reading, being able to read charts, not necessarily note for note notation, but to be able to interpret charts, and listening. And we would do so much listening. And he introduced me to bands like Steely Dan. He had me playing Black Cow and Josie, which,
Wow.
Steve Gadd obviously played on Josie.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was in year 10, so I'd have been, 14, 15 when I first got exposed to those guys. And that then opened up a whole new world for me.
That is incredible to have a teacher that brings that sort of stuff. It's interesting there you said about chart reading and how you interpret a chart, because I remember doing my first, which I've talked about before, my brass band practice, that when I was at school, I joined it was literally a piece of music and nobody really understood how a chart worked. So unfortunately, I didn't get that kind of education like you did. So lucky, it sounds like that guy was pretty lucky.
Completely grateful to him. I really was. And through that, I was able to play in some school orchestras and school jazz bands and things like that. And again, that gave me an appreciation of different types of music. And I was doing classical stuff, and I was playing timps, and I was playing snare drum.
That's it.
And then learning jazz as well. That was my first exposure to jazz when I was sort of 14, 15, and I got into the jazz band. And we went on to do little tours around Europe and stuff. We went to Italy, and we did bits in France. And it was fantastic, as a sort of 16, 17-year-old, getting that kind of exposure to that sort of music. It really was.
That's amazing. I mean, so by the time you're 17 then you've already been around Europe.
I've done Italy. Oh yeah, we did a jazz tour of Italy, and we went around Tuscany, and we played in Florence and Montecatini and a few places like that.
Sure.
And it was very unglamorous, and 48 hours on a coach with
yeah, I know.
30 odd. It was one of those, but it was great experience, playing music in these wonderful places and little towns high up in the mountains. Yeah, it was just an incredible time.
Yeah, I did.
And then from then I knew that actually that was what I wanted to do. And I dropped out of A-levels and went to college and did music.
So where did you study?
So I went first to what is now Bucks College. At the time, it was Amersham and Wickham College, and I did a BTEC, National Diploma in Music, Popular Music, for 2 years. And that's when I started having lessons with a guy called John Graham, who was a drummer in a funk band, and he's going to kill me because I can't remember the name of the band, but they'd won a MOBO, and he'd done some quite cool stuff, and he then turned me on to some of my biggest influences as a drummer. It was like taking it up a level. He turned me on to people like Jeff Porcaro, Manu Katché, Steve Gadd.
Wow.
I really started to do a lot of listening, and just discovering drummers. And around that sort of time, that's when it really became something quite serious for me. Learned the Porcaro shuffle. Took me 3 weeks of a lot of playing.
Steve, I'm still trying to learn that. And it still crops up with students. But so that brings us nicely to Toto, doesn't it? Well, it just for the listener. So, I briefly mentioned in the introduction that I used to work at a small teaching school. It was actually a music shop that had a couple of rooms upstairs, and it kind of evolved from that over the years. I was there for quite some time. I'm very grateful because it put me on the kind of building of becoming a teacher. And Steve was then recruited as one of the other drummers, and that's where I met Steve. But you kind of you were always coming in my room going on about all these drummers, and then some I knew and some I didn't know, and of course you then got talking about Toto, and then all the other teachers were just like Mr. Toto or whatever they were calling you, because you were just constantly addicted to.
I was obsessed.
The Toto
utterly
thing.
Obsessed. Yeah. And I still am, I suppose. I still, whenever they're in the country, I'll make sure I go and go and see him play. But, you know, those guys, in discovering Jeff Porcaro and discovering what it meant to be like a session musician and that you could have a career playing on all these thousands of records and stuff. And up till that point, I kind of thought by the time I was 18, 19, I was fairly certain that I knew who was who in the drumming world. I'd get Rhythm Magazine. I would see all the up-and-coming drummers. You know, you'd hear about Travis Barker with Blink-182. You'd see Taylor Hawkins of the Foo Fighters. You'd see, you know, a lot of the modern virtuosos, Tony Royce Jr., Thomas Lang.
Absolutely. All
of these guys, Mark Portnoy. And so I used to think, I know all the cool drummers. And then I found out about Jeff Porcaro, who you just never heard of.
Yeah, right.
Or certainly I never heard of. And it just opened me up to a completely different world of drummers and drumming. And then you'd look into his influences, and you'd go back and you'd look at Hal Blaine, and you'd go and look at some of the Wrecking Crew guys and where it all began. And actually, just as like a musical journey, Toto was what kicked it off. Not necessarily, because it's cheesy yacht rock, even as a massive fan. That is how I would describe it.
When I was keep that thought, Steely Dan was my lift music, right? And that's what I would. I mean, I love Toto. Don't get me wrong; it was totally my lift music. But then when you start getting into it, it's pretty cool lift music. You know,
100%. Yeah, and the older I've got, I will still go back and listen to those records the musicianship is just phenomenal. And then you look at the players on the records, and you find out about Steve Lukather as a guitarist and writer and who he's worked with, and the fact that basically the whole of Toto played on Michael Jackson's Thriller album.
Well, I did keep that thought, because I was just going to ask. My question was going to be, because I'd always heard that story. Like, so I remember in the 80s buying Thriller. I thought it was the best pop record. I didn't even consider it to be a pop record, right? It was just a record. It sounded good. I loved Michael Jackson. And, you know, I heard Billie Jean and I thought, this is nothing special drumming wise or whatever. But then, but it was just an amazing tune. Is that bass line? It was like my favorite bass line ever. You could rock out and play to it. And so over the years, you speak about and I always heard that there was some connection with Toto and Thriller album. So who on earth played on that album? Do you know?
So from the original, or the core group of Toto, Steve Lukather played a lot of guitars on it. Jeff Porcaro played on a few tracks on it.
Well, that's what I was
David
looking
Page,
for, I guess.
Keyboard player.
Yeah.
Yeah. He played on a lot of it. And then Steve Porcaro played on a lot of it, and he wrote quite a lot of it as well. So Human Nature is written by Steve Porcaro of Toto.
Right, so it's true.
Yeah, so there's quite a big connection. And a lot of them as musicians had worked with Quincy Jones before that, as session musicians on various different records. And it's one of those things, I mean, they're kind of like, I'm sure it was Steve Lukather who said they're like the ginger kids of rock and roll. You know, they're the really uncool, always often get overlooked, but they were there and they've done it all. And
you've created this image of heroes, right? And it's quite apt, I think, for the way I'm, you know, the forgotten heroes. I suppose, you know, what we're talking about, those people that made those records, along with the Wrecking Crew, nobody knows, or nobody did know at the time, who they were. You know, the Beach Boys is my favourite Wrecking Crew story. It wasn't even the Beach Boys. It's like, it was all those guys doing it. And, you know, so you're full of this. What do you want to do with that? So you got your BTEC.
So I went to London and I studied for a year at Drum Tech, which is now BIM.
You did. I'd forgotten about that you went to Drum Tech. Yeah.
I just did a year there. Yeah. I did a year there after college, just to kind of, I'd never really sought out to get a degree or anything like that, but I wanted to go to London, and I knew that I needed to learn a little bit more about the modern music industry. And you know, I'd kind of got so hooked up on the 80s and the 90s and these guys. And I felt, okay, well, I need to kind of see where things are at as well, and then try and put them together and find my own way. So I went to Drum Tech, I was playing quite a lot in bands at that time as well. We started a Blues Brothers tribute band. We actually started it on that jazz tour in Italy before I went to college, or that was where the idea was conceived, on one of those long 48-hour coach journeys through the Alps.
Right.
Listening to Blues Brothers records.
And finding home sweet home Chicago.
Yeah, that's it. And so I was gigging from sort of 17 or 18. A fair amount, I suppose, for someone of that age. I wasn't even driving yet. I was borrowing and stealing lifts everywhere. And
we all did that.
All the bandmates passed their tests, they sort of draw lots to see who gets the drummer and all of his gear with them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I get there. I've been there. No, right. So, okay. So Blues Brothers then. That is a remarkable thing, and let me explain for the listener, because I always knew that Steve was part of this Blues Brothers band, wasn't it? It was called Blues Brothers Band, and and I'd spoken to Steve, and he'd been with them for years, but I had not yet seen them. And we'll come back to your early years, but I remember going to a drum show with Steve. It was the London Drum Show. And we decided to spend the weekend. We got a room in a little bedsit kind of area, wasn't it? It was quite interesting.
It was,
and which fine, because it did the job. It did what we wanted to do, and because of that, we landed up spending a night, because the show was held over 2 days, but the show finishes at 5:00 in the afternoon. And so you've got a whole night in London. Now, I've spoken about previous podcasts about being in London. I get a buzz from being in London. So Steve says to me, well, we're gigging. So he was gigging. He was gigging with the Blues Brothers band. And so it's raining, if I remember rightly, because I bought an umbrella when I was with you.
Tacking it down.
I had to get an umbrella. I was drenched. So we walk into this pub. I can't remember where it was, but typical pub in London with a basement. And we stood outside the pub, and Steve met his bandmates that I didn't know. And they are the friendliest group of people ever. All their friends that I didn't know who was in the band and who wasn't, but everybody welcomed me in. Oh, it was some kind of private party. I'm sure you'll tell me in a minute. And we landed up going in this basement, and this group blew me away. I sat at the back of this bar, or this down sort of basement kind of bar, and I thought that band was incredible. Talk about influencing other people. I think you influenced me that night. That band is amazing. No, seriously. And I never forgot that night, because it was just the crowd of people were so friendly and just welcomed me into that gig. I'm on my own because you're playing, right? We're not sitting at the bar drinking, you're playing. The band guys are coming up to me. You all right, Glenn? How's it going? And that is an incredible band. That is an incredible... And you met at uni, essentially, or college or something.
Yeah, well, for a lot of us, it was even before that. It was sort of school. Most of them were sort of the year below me, but through doing the work in the orchestras and the jazz band, we kind of get to know each other. It sort of became something that we spoke about, and then nothing happened. And then 3 months later, they're like, "Oh, let's do a rehearsal. Let's do a gig. And I think our first gig consisted of like 4 songs or something, and we learned everybody, Shake a Tail Feather, Sweet Home Chicago, and Minnie the Moocher, and that was about it.
Yeah.
And it just escalated, and we loved the music. And we had these 2 incredible frontmen who would just captivate even the most stern, serious audience. I've never seen anything like it.
I think I remember that. You just drawn into that. They were just characters.
Yeah, they are absolutely brilliant. And then you had a band of these great musicians, just phenomenal players, all of them, behind them. And it just worked, but we never took it too seriously. And I don't mean that in the sense that we never took the music seriously, because we did. But if we weren't having a laugh on stage, something wasn't right. And I cannot remember doing a gig with them where I haven't been in creases at something at some point. It could be one of the singers going off on a random tangent and talking to the audience. It could be some improvised thing that goes on.
Sure.
We do. We're still together now. This is sort of, what are we? Nearly 20 years on. Nearly.
You're 20 years on as well. I'm 20 years with Wild.
Yeah, I think we must be near or thereabouts.
It's a rarity, don't you find? It's a rarity now where you get a guy that has been in a band for 20 years. I mean, a lot of people say, a lot of the children at school will say, are you in a band? And 20 years. How could, friendships sort of sometimes fade out in that, let alone you put the stress of being on stage and the differences you can have over music.
We've definitely had a few of those over the years, and when we started doing these sort of summer escapades, these sort of self put together tours around the UK, and then we'd always finish in Edinburgh, and we'd start doing the Edinburgh Festival, and one year we did a week's run, and then it was really popular. So then we did 2 weeks, then we did 3 weeks. And we'd sort of precede these Edinburgh shows with a run of shows in the UK, usually down the southwest. And then we'd start. One year we went over to Ireland, and we did a tour of Ireland from south to north, started in Cork, finished in Belfast, then went over to Edinburgh. And through that, we would then get to meet the organisers of Cork Jazz Festival, and that then became a regular gig for us every year. And the 100 Club in London is a regular gig for us every year, and we don't really do much in between anymore. Everyone's very busy. They're all sort of professionals. The sax player went on to work with Bombay Bicycle Club, and the trumpet player did a degree in music and now owns 2 restaurants, and everyone's kind of gone off and done their own thing. One of the backing singers is a radio presenter, and she does stuff on Jazz FM. We're just this incredible mix of really talented people. There's only 3 of us, I think, that still do music as our primary source of income, but we still get together every year, and we always do 100 Club, and pre-COVID we would do Cork Jazz Festival as well. I hear a lot about Cork Jazz Festival because we as Wild, we do Derry Jazz Festival, which is in Northern Ireland. I've yet to venture down to the Cork Jazz Festival, but if it's anything like the Northern Irish, it's a regular gig for us, and it's quite a special thing. I think, talking about bands getting on and be friends, that's, the logistics involved in that type of thing. You've got to be friends. If you don't come out 20 years later as friends, I mean, it's stressful. And I mean, you can talk. It is, isn't it? And I mean, you can talk to people and go, okay, well, I'm going to Cork, and then I'm going to, Coleraine or wherever, and then off to Edinburgh. It's okay. It sounds good when you're sitting there having that meal out with your family or your mates and stuff, but God, the logistics underneath it is a nightmare, especially getting equipment in. So hopefully we're going to be able to do that soon, because you're right. I guess have you got Cork booked in for this year? Because it's usually around about October. Am I right in saying that? Yeah, it's October. It's a bank holiday out there, so it's usually the last weekend in October. Falls around Halloween.
Okay.
So
fingers crossed.
In the diary yet, but we've certainly started talking. We are talking. It's just now with Brexit as well. It's logistically a little bit more complicated than it was previously, and it was always hard trying to get 10 of us plus crew plus gear to be free for the same 5 nights anyway.
You must
throw in visas, and I just think it's a whole different ball game now.
You must get on much better than we do, because there's 3 of us, and that can sometimes be a nightmare. I can't imagine for 1 second what it's like with 10 people. I mean,
family, you fight, you fall out,
you do,
you make up.
We have done many a time. I could talk to you. I could talk to you for hours, because it's really interesting, and I've learned so much about you. But I know time is beating us a little bit. But we'll have to do it again because
Absolutely, anytime, mate. It's been such a pleasure.
There's just so much I want to ask you, and I'm going to leave on one final question, and I think it's a question that's been sort of rocked about a bit because of the internet and stuff. What would you say to your student right now? What would you encourage them to think about, to work on, or even sort of something they can put in their mind to get through this pandemic? Because right now we know the music business has kind of evaporated for now, but we know it's not going to be like that forever.
No.
And I'm going to be probably too old to pick up when it does, and that's okay. But these students are kind of got to prepare themselves for something, whatever that something is. Who knows? But what would you say to somebody if they say to you, well, okay, there's no music scene anymore?
I think it's about preparation. It's about being ready when it comes, because it will come back, and it will come back in such a demand. And I can always remember something I was told years and years ago by one of my old drum teachers, and he said it was something that Vinnie Colaiuta said, and he said, you're only ever as good as the gig you're on.
Yeah.
And a good gig will only come when you're ready for it. And that really stuck with me. And I can remember all the times that I get in a real slump with my playing, or certainly for our performance students, you never know when that call is going to come. We don't know when this is going to pick up again, but you need to be ready for it. And you will never get a time in your, hopefully, touch wood, you will never get a time in your lives where everything stops like this.
Sure.
And think of it as a golden opportunity to practice, because once you get busy and you start working or you have families, practice becomes a luxury item.
It does.
It certainly is for me. I can count on my hands the amount of times I get to practice in a month.
Well,
it's half a dozen, maybe.
It was a few years back now, but Jojo Mayer, and I've met him a couple of times now, and just like I haven't seen him for a long time, obviously, and he said, "Well, how often do you practice?" And he said, "I don't." Which you can take two ways. It's like, really? You're that good and you don't practice? Or you could think, really? And and he just said, I don't have time. His practice is his playing. So
yeah, absolutely. And this kind of then that sort of feeds into that whole Vinnie Colaiuta thing, the whole you're only as good as the gig you're on. If you get on a gig that's not massively taxing from a playing point of view, and you go off on tour for 3 months or something like that, when you come back, although you might have been playing every day for 3 months, you might have great endurance and great stamina, but you will only ever be as good as the gig you've been doing.
That's right.
You'll have been so busy, you won't have been practicing anything else. So it can be quite a dangerous mindset to get into. And it's something I've really struggled with over the years, is being in that place where what's really practice, what's useful, and making the most of any practice time that does come my way, and making it more concise. And Benny Grebb's just written an amazing book called Effective Practice for Musicians.
I haven't seen it yet. You have to order it on his site, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a copy right there, actually. It's really, really good. It will change your mind about practicing. And it's to do with just switching that mindset from, am I playing or am I practicing? What do I need to do? And in this time, in this pandemic, where we've got, where people have got more time on their hands than they did, it's trying to encourage them to embrace that and practice and upskill and learn how to do all of these things, because when you get busy again, and it will get busy again, that time will go, and it'll become another period of time where you go, I wish I'd learned that as well. I wish I'd gone back and done this. So that's kind of the message I've been portraying. It's
good.
Encouragement and acceptance of the downtime and trying to make the most of it, utilize it and practice and just
fantastic.
Play as much as you can.
That's brilliant. And absolutely, I think the future of music depends on it. And I really believe that.
Absolutely does.
I really, really believe that with especially for me, but the younger guys, I want them to go out and grab them gigs now, Not just for the next couple of years, though, because I want them. I don't want to give them all.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Steve, it's been a pleasure hearing your stories. And,
thank you.
Thank you
for
I hope
having
those
me,
listening are really inspired by Steve's story. A wonderful gentleman. We will leave some links on the end of our post. The podcast is available on iTunes and Spotify as well, and we'll more than likely put this on YouTube, so we'll put some links so you can find Steve, and we should put some Lucy Diamond stuff on there as well so people can check her out and see what you've been up to. So Steve, it is a pleasure. Thank you very much, sir.
No, thank you.
We will catch you another time. And that's it for everybody with this episode. We will see you on the next episode, hopefully with another exciting guest. Thank you for listening. I'm truly grateful. Bye-bye now.
Jitterbop, 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 we're gonna rock a jitterbop, 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 we're gonna rock and she's my jitterbop, baby jitterbop.